What if your loudest prayer was the one you never said out loud? What if heaven doesn't respond to how much you speak, but how deeply you surrender? You see, in a world addicted to volume, Jesus mastered the power of silence. Before every turning point, he disappeared into the wilderness, into the quiet, into places where no one was watching. But the Father was speaking, not to hide, not to escape, but to align, because stillness isn't passive. It's intentional. It's strategy. It's where clarity is born, where battles are won, before anyone sees the victory. And maybe the reason you haven't heard God lately isn't because he stopped speaking. Maybe it's because your life is too loud to hear him. So here's the question. Are you willing to step into silence to finally hear the one who's been whispering all along? The sacred strategy most people miss. Prayer. For most people, it's background noise. Something polite, something expected, but rarely something powerful. Not for Jesus. For him, prayer wasn't routine. It was strategy. His place of alignment. His quiet before the storm. His fire before the miracle. Every time the pressure rose, he didn't speak louder. He got quieter. He withdrew. Not to escape, but to reconnect. Because stillness wasn't delay. It was preparation. It was where the unseen war was won, before the public moment ever happened. And maybe that's what we've forgotten. That silence isn't the absence of activity. It's the presence of intention. So if life feels chaotic, if your soul is tired, and God feels distant, the answer isn't to do more. It's to listen better. And to do that, you'll have to learn what Jesus modeled again and again. He stepped away so he could show up differently. Let's start there. 1. Jesus withdrew to recharge, not to retreat. Let's begin here. Most people only withdraw when they're losing, when they're overwhelmed, when they've hit a wall they can't climb anymore. But Jesus withdrew while winning. Right when his name was spreading. Right when people were lining up for healing. Right when the demand was highest, he disappeared. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Pause on that. He didn't sleep in. He didn't ride the momentum. He didn't stay in the crowd. He walked away, not to hide, but to refill. Because Jesus knew something that most of us forget. When your name gets louder, your spirit needs to get quieter. You don't wait for your soul to feel empty. Before you seek God, you stay full by returning to him first. And let's be clear, Jesus wasn't exhausted here. He was intentional. He didn't withdraw from weakness. He withdrew from wisdom. Because silence wasn't his way of running away. It was his way of staying ahead. Most of us live on spiritual reaction. We wait until we burn out, then beg for peace. But Jesus lived in spiritual rhythm. He pulled away before the burnout. So when the chaos came, he was already steady, already sourced, already full. Let's put this in today's terms. Imagine waking up to hundreds of people, begging for your help, your calendar full, your inbox overflowing, everyone needing something from you. But your spirit hasn't even had time to breathe. That's what Jesus faced daily. But he didn't get pulled into the urgency. He returned to intimacy, not with the world, with his Father. He chose stillness over momentum, presence over popularity, depth over distraction. And this wasn't once or twice. Luke says, "But Jesus often withdrew to lonely places and prayed." Often. Not occasionally. Not when convenient. Not when everything was already falling apart. He built withdrawal into his strategy. Not as retreat, but as recalibration. He wasn't reacting to pressure. He was preparing for it. And here's the shift most of us need to make. Stop seeing rest as recovery. Start seeing it as reinforcement. Stop seeing silence as weakness. Start using it as your strongest weapon, because you can't lead with clarity if you never stop to listen. You can't pour into others if you've never been poured into, and you can't hear heaven if your mind is ruled by the noise of earth. Jesus didn't let the world set his pace. He returned to the quiet, to stay in rhythm with the Father. That's not just spiritual wisdom, that's tactical brilliance. So here's the question. When was the last time you stepped away? Not because you were tired, but because you refused to live unanchored? What would your days look like if stillness wasn't a break, but a baseline? If prayer wasn't what you did after everything failed, but what you did before anything began? Jesus shows us it's possible to live from fullness, but only if you protect the source. Withdraw, not to hide, not to retreat, but to realign. Because the most powerful moments in public are always preceded by quiet moments in private. And once you learn to fight your battles there, you'll stop needing to prove yourself anywhere else. Let's go deeper. What happens when stillness becomes more than preparation and turns into resistance? Let's talk about that next. 2. Stillness is spiritual resistance in a noisy world. We live in a world that worships noise. The louder you are, the more you're heard. The faster you move, the more successful you appear. The more you post, speak, react, the more people think you matter. But Jesus didn't play that game. He didn't need the spotlight. He didn't chase the platform. He didn't perform for applause. He resisted the pressure to constantly respond. And he did it through something radical, something misunderstood, something almost extinct in our age: stillness. Think about it. When Jesus stood before Pilate, accused, insulted, surrounded by false witnesses, he said nothing. But Jesus gave him no answer, not even to a single charge. He didn't defend himself. He didn't react. He didn't fill the silence. Why? Because stillness was power. He wasn't being passive. He was being precise. Sometimes the most dominant thing you can do is stay quiet. Not because you're afraid, but because you're anchored. Stillness is spiritual resistance. It's how you say, "I'm not ruled by noise. I move when God moves." You see, the enemy doesn't just attack you with pain. He attacks you with distraction, with urgency, with noise. Because noise keeps you reacting. Noise keeps you emotional. Noise keeps you too busy to actually hear the only voice that matters. And that's where stillness becomes a weapon. It's not just about relaxing. It's about reclaiming your attention. Stillness says, I choose presence over performance. I don't need to explain myself to stay powerful. I don't need to be loud to be heard in heaven. This is exactly how Jesus moved. He spoke when necessary. He withdrew when needed. And his silence carried more authority than most people's speeches. The world tells you, speak now, defend yourself, prove your point, react fast, don't stay behind. But Jesus paused, listened, stayed still. Because power doesn't always push forward. Sometimes it holds, it waits, it resists. And when you learn to do the same, your atmosphere shifts. You stop being reactive. You stop being pulled into noise-driven drama. You stop dancing to the world's tempo and move to heaven's rhythm instead. So here's your next tactic. Don't just slow down. Be still on purpose. Silence your phone. Step away from screens. Don't just read your Bible. Sit with it. Don't just say your prayer. Wait after it. Because stillness isn't the space between moments. It's the space where God speaks into moments. You want clarity? You want peace? You want strength that doesn't shake when life does? Then practice stillness. Daily, deliberately, devotionally. Because in a world ruled by reaction, stillness is rebellion. Holy rebellion. Spiritual control. the kind of quiet that shakes hell and draws heaven close. Let's move to the next level, because when your prayers aren't about words, but alignment, something changes. And Jesus showed us how. 3. Prayer is not performance, it's positioning. Somewhere along the way, we started treating prayer like a performance. Say the right words, in the right order, with the right tone. And maybe, just maybe, God will hear you. But Jesus, He didn't teach us to impress God. He taught us to approach Him. When you pray, don't babble like the pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. He's saying prayer isn't a speech. It's not a show. It's not a formula to force results. Prayer is positioning. Positioning your heart under heaven's authority. Positioning your mind away from fear. Positioning your spirit into alignment. It's not how long you pray. It's how honest. It's not how loud you pray. It's how surrendered. And Jesus modeled that. When He prayed in Gethsemane, He didn't recite something rehearsed. He wrestled. He cried. He said, "If it's possible, take this cup from me." But He didn't stop there. He added the most powerful line in all of prayer. "Yet not my will, but yours be done." That's not performance. That's position. And that's what most of us are missing. We're praying from pressure, but not from posture. We rush through our words and hoping God will catch one and fix our situation. But Jesus prayed slowly, deliberately, from stillness, from surrender. Because prayer isn't just about moving God's hand. It's about yielding to His will. Here's the truth most of us avoid. Real prayer doesn't always change your circumstances. It changes you. It softens your ego. It calms your anxiety. It rewires your heart to trust what you can't control. It shifts you from demanding outcomes to receiving peace. So how do you pray like that? You start small. You stop performing. You stop trying to sound spiritual. You say what's real. God isn't moved by polish. He's moved by honesty. Try breath prayers. One-line cries from the heart. "Lord, I trust you. Speak, and I'll listen. I don't understand, but I'm here. Your will, not mine." Let those simple sentences become anchors in your day. They don't have to be loud. They just have to be true. You see, Jesus wasn't trying to show us how to be eloquent. He was showing us how to be aligned. Because a heart that's surrendered in stillness has more authority than 1,000 words shouted from stress. So here's the next shift. Don't pray to perform. Pray to position yourself under the One who already sees and already knows. Next, we'll look at how Jesus gave us a prayer, not to memorize, but to model. And once you understand the strategy inside the Lord's Prayer, you'll never rush through it again. 4. The Lord's Prayer, a blueprint, not a script. Let's be honest. For many of us, the Lord's Prayer has become background noise. We know the words. We can recite them without thinking. We've heard it in churches, at funerals, and movies. But Jesus didn't give us these words to memorize. He gave them to reshape how we approach God. This wasn't a formula. It was a framework, a spiritual recentering tool. Not just for moments of crisis, but for every moment you want to come back into alignment. Let me tell you a quick story. A friend of mine once said, "I prayed the Lord's Prayer every day for a month. Not fast, just one line at a time. I didn't even finish it half the days, but it changed my life." Why? Because when you slow down, when you sit inside each line, you start to see it's not just a prayer. It's a conversation with God that changes you while you're having it. Take the first line, "Our Father who art in heaven." Pause right there. That's not an opening phrase. That's identity realignment. It's you remembering God is not a distant ruler. He's not a cosmic vending machine. He's your Father, personal, present, close. When you start prayer there, You don't pray like a beggar. You pray like a son, like a daughter. That changes the tone of everything. Then, your kingdom come, your will be done. Let's be real. That's the hardest line in the whole thing. Because that's surrender. It's you saying, God, even if your plan is slower, stranger, or scarier than mine, I still want it more than mine. That takes trust, real trust. And some days, that line alone might be your whole prayer. Then comes the practical. Give us this day our daily bread. Not tomorrow, not abundance, not overflow, just today's bread. Jesus is teaching us, you don't need everything figured out. You just need enough peace for today, enough wisdom for today, enough strength for this step. It's not weakness to pray like that. It's faith in action. Then, forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. This line stings, because it puts a mirror in your hand. You're asking for grace, but God's saying, will you pass it on? Real prayer doesn't let you hold grudges. It forces you to let go, because nothing clogs the pipeline of peace like hidden resentment. And finally, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. This isn't a paranoid line. It's a preparation line. Jesus knew the enemy's real, and he knew you can't fight spiritual battles with physical tools. So he gave us this line to remind us, you're not alone in the fight. You're not supposed to be strong enough. You're supposed to stay connected. The Lord's Prayer isn't a script you run through. It's a room you walk through, slowly, line by line, letting each phrase reshape your posture. So don't rush it. Don't recite it like a duty. Let it be a moment of reconnection. Let it calm your soul, refocus your heart, and bring your mind back to what matters. It's not how many words you say. It's how open you are while you say them. That's where the shift happens. That's where peace starts to flow. Next, we'll look at how Jesus used prayer, not just in private, but before every major decision in his life. Because for him, prayer wasn't an afterthought. It was the starting position for power. Let's go there next. 5. Jesus prayed before every strategic decision. If you study Jesus closely, not just his miracles, not just his teachings, but his rhythm, you'll notice something consistent. He never walked into a moment of consequence without first entering a moment of communion. In other words, Jesus never made a strategic decision without prayerfully positioning himself before it. Let's take one example. Before he chose the 12 disciples, the men who would carry his message to the world, he didn't consult popularity, performance, or resumes. He spent the night in stillness. One of those days, Jesus went out to a mountainside to pray and spent the night praying to God. All night, no crowd, no distraction, just him and the Father, listening, sifting, aligning. He knew that who you walk with determines what you build. So he didn't choose from pressure. He chose from presence. Another moment. Before he was betrayed, before he faced the cross, Jesus went to Gethsemane. He didn't fight the moment with logic. He didn't numb himself with distractions. He prayed. He sweat blood. He wrestled, not with people, but with surrender. And in that garden, he made a decision that saved the world. So what does this mean for us? It means prayer isn't what you do after you've decided. Prayer is what you do so you can decide well. And let's be honest, most of us flip that. We plan, we move, we post, we sign the deal, we say yes. Then we ask God to bless what we've already started. But Jesus teaches us a different pattern. Don't just pray for your plans. Let prayer become your plan. Before the meeting, pray. Before the message, pray. Before the relationship, pray. Before the opportunity, pray. Before the confrontation, pause and get heaven's tone first. Prayer isn't weakness. It's not delay. It's not hesitation. It's leadership. It's how you take authority over the decision before the consequences ever arrive. You might be wondering, but what if I don't hear anything when I pray? Sometimes the clarity comes after the stillness, not in the moment, but because of the moment. Jesus didn't always pray for answers. He prayed to align his will with the Father's. Because when you're spiritually aligned, even a hard decision feels covered. That's what gives you peace. Even when you don't have control, that's what gives you boldness. Without needing certainty, that's how you step into the unknown. Not with fear, but with authority. So here's the invitation. Before you move, kneel. Before you speak, center. Before you decide, listen. Because every time Jesus paused to pray, he came back with clarity, with confidence, and with conviction. And that's how we're meant to move too. In the next part, we'll look at one of the most misunderstood powers of the spiritual life. How stillness doesn't just prepare you. It opens your ears to the whisper of God. Let's talk about listening, not just speaking. 6. Stillness creates room for God's voice to lead. Let me ask you something real. When was the last time you sat in silence? Not to escape, but to listen. Not to fix anything. Not to prove anything. Not even to say anything. Just to be still. It's harder than it sounds, right? Because everything around you, your phone, your deadlines, your notifications, they all scream, stay busy, stay moving, stay loud. But here's what Scripture teaches us. After the wind, the earthquake, and the fire came a gentle whisper. That's how Elijah heard God. Not in the chaos, not in the shaking, not in the fire, but in a whisper. And the only way to hear a whisper is to get close and get quiet. Jesus lived by this principle. He knew that guidance didn't come from the crowd. It came from communion. And that's why he protected stillness like it was sacred. He didn't just go off to pray to talk. He went to listen. Because when you're constantly surrounded by noise, even good noise, your spirit starts to forget what the Father's voice sounds like, and you start mistaking urgency for direction, emotion for conviction, people's opinions for God's leading. But stillness clears the fog. Think about this. When you're constantly moving, constantly talking, you might miss the very thing God's been trying to say. You're waiting for a sign, but He's been waiting for your attention. You're asking for answers, but He's been whispering peace. You want direction, but He's not going to shout over your distractions. Here's a story that still stays with me. A woman once told me, I stopped praying with my mouth and started praying with my ears. That's when everything changed. She wasn't trying to control God. She was learning to receive from Him. That's the kind of stillness that leads. That's the posture that moves heaven. So here's a question for you, one that could shift your entire rhythm. Do you make space for stillness, or do you only fall into it when you crash? Because stillness isn't a luxury. It's a lifeline. It's not just where we find rest. It's where we receive revelation. When was the last time you sat with no agenda and just let God speak? No requests, no pressure, no trying to sound spiritual, just still, just open, just present. Because here's the truth, God's not in a rush. He's not impressed by your speed. He's not moved by your effort. He's moved by your surrender. And surrender often starts with silence. So let this be your 6th tactic. Protect stillness. Like your spiritual clarity depends on it. Because it does. Set time where you don't talk, where you don't scroll, where you don't ask for anything. Just sit, breathe, be aware that God is near, and let Him be God. Because when you create room for His voice, you'll stop being pushed around by every other one. And that's when real direction begins. Up next, we tie it all together. Because stillness and prayer aren't just practices. They're a way of life. Let's bring it home. When you master the quiet, you lead the battle. If the enemy can't destroy you, he'll try to distract you. And if he can keep you busy, he can keep you from being still enough to hear the only voice that truly matters. But Jesus didn't fall for the noise. He didn't react to the pressure. He didn't chase crowds or praise or urgency. He chose stillness, strategically, deliberately, consistently. This wasn't passive. It was power under perfect control. And if you look closely at his life, you'll see what he was really teaching us, that the ones who know how to be quiet are the ones who become undeniably strong. Let's bring it all together. Jesus withdrew not to hide, but to reload. He stayed silent as a way of resisting the world's tempo. He prayed, not to sound spiritual, but to stay in position. He gave us the Lord's Prayer as a framework for alignment, not performance. He made every major decision from a place of presence, not pressure. And he taught us that stillness isn't the absence of movement. It's where real direction is born. So here's what you do now. You stop treating stillness like it's optional. You start treating it like it's your strategy, like it's how you prepare for every storm and how you return to peace even in the middle of it. You stop chasing clarity through chaos and start finding it in the quiet. Because once you know how to carry stillness, you don't need to raise your voice to walk in authority. You don't need applause to walk in purpose. You don't need perfect conditions to move with heaven. So right now, choose the quiet. Turn off the noise, not just outside you, but inside you. And say it with boldness. God, I don't need control. I just need your presence. That is where your real power begins. Tell me, what noise are you choosing to silence this week? Subscribe if you're ready to build a life anchored in the voice of God, not the volume of the world. Share this with someone whose soul is loud, but whose heart is ready to be still again. Because when you master the quiet, you no longer chase peace, you become it.